Mm. Are you able to see my screen?
No. Yeah, it's coming now. Okay, yeah.
I think we were just, I put a marker. So we did the diagram and then, yes, we crossed this point.
121 in the print.
Yes, perfect. 121 para 3.
Yeah.
On the print, 121 para 3. I'm sorry about the few minutes of delay today. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai.
Sure.
As the involution of consciousness of mental conscious God in the man state gradually progresses deeper and deeper, he experiences his mastery over the mind, and the consciousness of mental conscious God is said to be mind personified. Thus, God in the man state now becomes fully conscious of the mind or the mental body and experiences the whole of the mental sphere or the mental world in the sixth plane of mental consciousness. This experience is of seeing God in his original state face to face. This seeing is the seeing of the mental consciousness with the mental sense of seeing. In other words, God in the man state sees God everywhere and in everything. Right from the first plane up to the sixth plane, the involution of consciousness progressed gradually and consistently as the consciousness of God underwent fewer and scarcer experiences of multifarious and diverse opposite impressions, which grew fainter and fainter. Therefore, during the progress of the involution of consciousness of God, diverse opposite impressions gradually lessened and became fainter until the involved consciousness of God in the sixth plane was fully conscious of the mental body and experienced the mental world in full with practically no impressions at all except for a last faint trace of residual impressions of opposites. In other words, the involved consciousness fully identifies with the mind, and God tends to realize that he is mind. Now, God in the man state as mind has the last finite impression that he, as mind, sees God face to face in all things except in his self. This is the state of God in the man state in the sixth plane of consciousness. This mental conscious God in the man state of the sixth plane, practically void of all impressions at this point and only conscious of mind, is now confronted by God Himself and sees Him face to face and also sees Him in all things, but he does not see his self in God because he is still impressed with the consciousness of mind and takes himself as mind. This mental conscious God in the man state, associating himself with mind, is conscious of himself as mind and experiences himself as still something other than God because he actually sees God face to face with his mental consciousness. Then, too, he sees God much more vividly and intensively than in the gross or subtle state of God. He can see the gross and subtle objects in the gross and subtle worlds. In this stage, the consciousness of God, which had experienced diverse and innumerable opposite impressions, now experiences the last trace of dual impressions of opposites. Therefore, mental conscious God in the man state on the sixth plane is yet conscious of duality, that is, identifies himself as mind and differentiates himself from God. In order to understand the involution of consciousness in the mental sphere more clearly, it is necessary to understand that the mental sphere of the fifth and the sixth planes of consciousness is the domain of the mind. The mind of the mental plane has two sections. In the first section, the state of mind is inquiring or reflecting. In this state, mind functions as thoughts, high thoughts, low thoughts, good thoughts, bad thoughts, material thoughts, spiritual thoughts, and thoughts of every kind, type, and state. In the second section of the state
Can you,
of mind,
can you mark this page?
sure.
It tells all that I've been explaining. I'll discuss this at the end of the session.
Yeah. Okay. In the second section, the state of mind is impressive or sympathetic. In this state, mind functions as feelings, feelings of suffering and emotions, feelings of desires and longings, feelings of pangs of separation, and feelings of every kind and type and state. Since mind of the mental sphere has distinct dual functions, it is inevitable that the experiences in the field of mind, the mental sphere, must be distinctly of two kinds also. Thus, the mental sphere has two domains. Therefore, the domain of the fifth plane of consciousness is of thoughts, and the domain of the sixth plane of consciousness is of feelings. Consequently, the consciousness of mental conscious God in the man state in the fifth plane identifies with the first section of mind, which is inquiring or reflecting mind. Therefore, this mental conscious God in the man state of the fifth plane is the creator and master of thoughts, as he is thoughts personified, and is accordingly capable of controlling only the thought section of all minds of all gross and subtle conscious states of God. This is often misinterpreted as controlling the minds of all gross and subtle conscious states of God, but the fact is that God in the fifth plane of consciousness does not control the mind as a whole, but controls only that state of mind which functions as thoughts. Mental conscious God in the man state in the fifth plane of consciousness, while identifying himself as inquiring or reflecting mind, emanating only thoughts, does not identify himself with the second section of mind and is therefore still incapable of establishing mastery over feelings, that is, emotions and desires. With greater involution of consciousness, mental conscious God in the man state of the fifth plane progresses into the sixth plane of consciousness, wherein he gains consciousness of the second section of the mind of the mental sphere and thus tends to identify himself with that second section of mind, impressive or sympathetic. Mental conscious God in the man state in the sixth plane of consciousness experiences the mental world with the mental sense of seeing through complete identification with feelings, and thus God in the man state is not thoughts but is feelings personified. Wherefore, he experiences consciously the feelings of seeing God face to face continuously in all things and everywhere. He feels seeing God everywhere continuously, but he cannot feel seeing himself in God as God. For this reason, he cannot reconcile feelings of sight of God with his own identity as God, because he still identifies himself with feelings. He feels for, longs for, and pangs for union with God, whom he at this stage feels seeing face to face. This identification with the second section of the mind, feelings, is the state of God in the man state, where the predominant aspect of divine love, which eventually leads to union with God, realization of the God state consciously, is manifested most forcefully. Hence, it should be clear that the fifth plane of the mental sphere is the state of full consciousness of thoughts only. The mastery of control and creation of thoughts alone is established, and there is no mastery or control over feelings of desires and emotions. But the sixth plane of the mental sphere is the state of full consciousness of feelings, and thus the mastery over control and creation of feelings is established, and no more scope is now left for even a single thought to penetrate into the domain of feelings. The sixth plane, consciousness, is thoughtless and governs the feelings of all the gross and subtle conscious states of God. This is often misinterpreted as mastery over the hearts of all those in the gross and subtle conscious states of God. He does not govern or regulate the so-called hearts, but controls and governs that second section of mind in the mental sphere, which emanates feelings of emotions and desires. The loving of God and the longing for his union is really and fully demonstrated in the sixth plane of consciousness. Only when the sixth plane of mental sphere is transcended does illusion vanish with the vanishing of the last trace of impressions, and reality is realized. Mental conscious God in the man state on the sixth plane is still experiencing duality, because God in this state of consciousness finds himself as mind and not as God. This experience of duality lingers on and on until the final involution of consciousness attains the seventh plane of consciousness. This is the final and seventh stage in the process of an involution of consciousness, when the full consciousness of God in the man state is now fully withdrawn inwards so completely that it is now fixed and focused onto himself rather than onto the objects of his own creation. Now that full consciousness has been fully involved, the objects of nothingness, which apparently appeared to exist, vanish completely together with their impressions. With complete annihilation of impressions of the associations of the nothing, the impressioned consciousness of God in the man state is spontaneously transformed into the unimpressioned or impressionless consciousness of God, which makes God in the man state experience the passing away in his original state of absolute vacuum. It is but natural that the full consciousness, fully involved and now free from even the slightest trace of any impression, should give no other experience but that of the original absolute vacuum state of God, which once prevailed and which is now experienced consciously. This full consciousness, fully involved, is the super consciousness or the Maha Chaitanya. The unconscious God in the original absolute state is now fully conscious or super conscious of his original state of God in the beyond state. The passing away in the absolute vacuum of the original state of God is called attaining the fana of the seventh plane of consciousness. In Sufi terms, fana means passing away in. Fana has two stages. The first stage of fana is the conscious experience of the absolute vacuum state. And the second stage of fana or fana phila is the conscious experience of the I am God state. Fana phila, the second stage, is the goal of God in the man state, where God in human form, that is as man, ultimately realizes the I am God state with full consciousness. This is the state of final mazboobiyat, as it is termed by the Sufis. Much before the first stage of fana is attained, God in the man state, as man, had full consciousness of the limited ego or I, mind, energy, body, and the world in an ordinary awake state, because the full consciousness of God in the man state, as man, was directly focused on them through their finite impressions. And as soon as the consciousness of God in the man state, as man, began to involve, the involved consciousness experienced gradually the six planes of subsuper consciousness through impressions gathered and spent in each of the six planes. When the subsuper consciousness completely involved, that is, was withdrawn inwards towards himself, then God, in the man state, as man, gained the seventh plane of superconsciousness, devoid of all impressions. This was the final stage in attaining the goal. Simultaneously, with the complete involution of consciousness and on gaining superconsciousness, the mind is finally completely annihilated and vanishes once and for all time together with all impressions. The false experiences of the limited ego or I, mind, energy, body, and the world all disappear forever, vanishing completely, because all these experiences were but the outcome of the impressions generated out of the nothing, which literally meant nothing and were nothing. Consequently, with the vanishing of the limited ego or I, mind, energy, body, typifying happiness, and worlds with all of their corresponding paraphernalia, a state of absolute vacuum is spontaneously experienced by the consciousness, which remains eternally when once it is gained. At this stage, God, in the man state as man, with full consciousness as superconsciousness, is now only conscious of absolute vacuum. The consciousness is now fixed and focused on absolute vacuum itself. This vacuum is absolute in its entirety. Vacuum alone prevails, and there is an entire absence of the nothing as well as the everything. This is therefore called the divine absolute vacuum, and it is not born of illusion, but it is born of reality. This state of divine vacuum prevails just at the instant when the nothing disappears or vanishes, and just immediately before the everything fills in that vacuum to give conscious experience of the reality of the I am God state. This is the first stage of fana, where all that is of the nothing vanishes completely and where the superconsciousness is focused only on the absolute vacuum, which now prevails as it prevails eternally in the original God is state of God, in original divine sound sleep. Therefore, in the first stage of fana, the consciousness of God in the man state as man is not of the limited self or ego or I, mind, energy, body, and worlds, nor is the consciousness even of God or the unlimited self or ego or I, universal mind, unbounded energy, universal body, and universes, because in the first stage of fana, only the consciousness of absolute vacuum prevails. This vacuum is also divine. It is not of illusion, but it is of reality. In this first stage of fana, the superconsciousness of God in the man state as man experiences the passing away in the absolute vacuum state of the original God is state, and thus conscious now only of absolute vacuum. I'll stop here. I'm struggling with one concept, which is I understand the passing away in, but how is the absolute vacuum not of illusion but of reality? Because all of this started with the nothing. So he makes that first reference in the last page where, yeah, right here. This is, if you're seeing my screen, this is therefore called the divine absolute vacuum. And it is not born of illusion, but it is born of reality. We can decide to park it there and keep thinking, but this is something I did not get.
It is pretty abstract at this
Yes,
stage. You
yes, that's what I think so.
See, I can give you my insight.
Sure.
We have traveled entire
So,
84. Come up, please go.
see, the first state of fana, passing away in first stage of fana, is the conscious experience of the divine absolute vacuum state. This is the beyond state one, God state one.
Mhm.
And you will actually get the description of this much more when we finish this chapter
States
and
of
when we
God.
come to the 10 states of God. Okay.
Yeah.
In the second stage of fana or fana phila is the conscious experience of the I am God state. So the difference between the first stage of fana and the second stage of fana phila is in the first stage, there is no conscious experience of anything. Okay. You are in sound sleep state. It's totally, like a black hole. The second state, I am God state, is actually the Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So later on, when you come to the table on 278, you will get to understand the details much more after you read the 10 different God states. So you can just look at it like I am God state is basically like the beyond God state, which is state 2 of God. When the whim happens, you have infinite consciousness and infinite unconsciousness. So state A is called, there are three substates in beyond God state, which is state 2, when you read the 10 states
Yeah.
of God. So there you will see that this I am God state is state 3. Okay. So state A, which comes under beyond God state 2, there are three substates, substate A, substate B, substate C. So substate A is basically infinite unconsciousness, which goes through this whole process of uh, evolution, reincarnation, and involution. Okay. And when it reaches the seventh plane, it reaches this Nirvikalpa Samadhi, I am God state. Okay. That is the state, substate 3. And sorry, it's called substate C. Okay. And the B state was basically the infinite consciousness, which is basically Paramatma, you know. So this details you will come across later, so I won't get into too much of detail right now. That's
No,
a
I
different.
think the states and state transition, I'm kind of, getting. And as you said, I have also been thinking. Anyway, it's covered in the states of God in the supplement. But what I am very much struggling with is we started with nothing, right? And everything was a projection of nothing into nothingness. And in but now we are told that the divine absolute vacuum is of reality. So that's something I'll keep thinking about. And if I get some insights, if anybody gets insights, we'll need to
See,
discuss that.
as soon as the whim starts,
Yeah,
is basically the projection of the nothing. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
So that is all illusion. See, the whim is creating the first urge to know itself, and the first urge to know itself creates a sanskaric impression, which is called the most fundamental impression.
Correct.
So actually, if you look at it, Baba says beyond God state, the divine vacuum state can't be explained. Okay, which is basically state 1 of God. And then the state 2 of God, there are three substates, which you will come to know later. So the when the whim happens, the whim itself is an illusion. It's latent in the nothing. Okay, the whole thing is latent. The whim, the urge to know, the creation, preservation, dissolution, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, everything is latent in the divine vacuum, which is the only reality. And that reality, when it wakes up with the whim, starts this whole process of illusion, which is the nothing, as you said, the projection of the nothing as everything.
Projection of the nothing as nothingness, which is the everything.
As nothing.
But
yes,
it is illusion.
the illusion. Yes, exactly. Correct.
But
the infinite nothing. Basically. Yeah.
correct. Okay. So we will keep going. Second paragraph of 127. As has already been said, this absolute vacuum state is also established in the everyday sound sleep state of a normal man, where the limited ego or I, mind, energy, body, and the worlds also vanish, and the consciousness gained remains dormant. The only difference which truly makes a world of difference between the absolute vacuum state of the everyday sound sleep state of man and the experience of the absolute vacuum in the first stage of fana is that although the same absolute vacuum is established also in fana, yet in fana the consciousness no longer remains dormant. In this stage, it is fully and completely matured consciousness, now actually experiencing the very same absolute vacuum state as the original state of God. So consciousness, in fana, the consciousness no longer remains dormant. So what's the difference between the two? The only difference, I'll read again, sorry. The only difference which truly makes a world of difference between the absolute vacuum state of the everyday sound sleep state of man and the experience of the absolute vacuum in the first stage of fana is that although the same absolute vacuum is established also in fana, yet in fana, the consciousness no longer remains dormant. So it was dormant it's dormant in the sound sleep. Correct.
Correct.
Okay. In this stage, it is fully and completely matured consciousness, now actually experiencing the very same absolute vacuum state as the original state of God. Got it. The experience of the first stage of fana is the nirvana state. Nirvana is that state where apparently God is not. This is the only state where God is not and consciousness is. This experience of the first stage of fana is what Buddha emphasized, but later on it was misinterpreted as Buddha having emphasized that there was no God. The reality, however, is that God is, but in the absolute vacuum state of the first stage of fana, only consciousness remains, experiencing absolute vacuum. As it can never happen for God not to exist, in the state of nirvana, God plays the part of consciousness itself, which consciousness is sometimes termed super consciousness or Maha Chaitanya. I think this is a very profound description. As it can never happen for God not to exist, in the state of nirvana, God plays the part of consciousness itself, which consciousness is sometimes termed super consciousness or Maha Chaitanya. The second stage of fana follows this nirvana state, and the I am God state is experienced consciously. However, it is only in some cases that the first stage of fana is immediately followed by the second stage of fana called fana phila, where the annihilated false and limited ego or I is replaced by the real and infinite unlimited I, on which the superconsciousness now becomes automatically focused. Simultaneously, the absolute vacuum is automatically filled by the experience of the infinite. The superconsciousness of God in the man state, as man, now fixed and focused on the unlimited I, spontaneously identifies man with God the infinite. Simultaneously with the identification, the superconsciousness of God, the infinite, experiences the I am God state. This is the goal. Attainment of the goal is to attain the Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Just as man goes to sleep every night and must wake up every day in the state of man, so also when one goes into divine sleep, one must wake up in the divine. Similarly, the first stage of fana is the sound sleep state with full consciousness, and the second stage of Fana, which is Fana Phila, is the state of awakening in God as God. When the first stage of Fana is immediately followed by the second stage of Fana Phila, in some cases the consciousness of the limited I, self, mind, energy, body, and the worlds does not come back. But the consciousness now as superconsciousness of the unlimited I only exists as identified with the universal self, God. The superconsciousness now experiences the I am God, Aham Brahmasmi, or Anal Hak state. This is the experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, meaning thereby, undoubtedly I am God. This is experienced because in Fana Phila, the Atma consciously merges completely in Paramatma, or in Fana Phila, the soul achieves complete union with the Oversoul. This experience is the goal, and it was attained only after the evolution of the consciousness, latent in the nothing, took place when the latent finite nothing manifested as infinite nothingness. The evolved consciousness, while infinitely entangling itself in the field of nothingness, experienced this false and finite nothingness as real and infinite. Ultimately, when this consciousness involved, it gradually experiences the infinite falsity of the infinitely false nothingness and eventually realizes the infinite reality of the God, the infinite, as the everything beyond doubt and beyond limitations and as eternal existence in the I am God state of Fana Phila. We'll understand Nirvikalpa Samadhi. The soul has necessarily to pass through the state of Nirvana to attain liberation, Mukti. Escape from the round of birth and death is attained both in Nirvana and in Nirvikalpa. It is because of this that Nirvana is supposed to be the goal, but the fact is that the real goal for one in human form is to attain Nirvikalpa. And there is a world of difference between Nirvana as goal and Nirvikalpa the goal. Nirvana as goal and Nirvikalpa the goal. Okay. So with that, we will jump to Fana Phila, which is from the supplement.
Page 239.
Can I just clarify that at this stage, the human body is dropped at nirvana, or we are still carrying the body into seventh plane? Anybody?
Well, nirvana basically, when you attain this divine vacuum state, the first stage of Fana, Baba in discourses and probably in God Speak says that most souls after nirvana, which is mukti liberation, they decide to go into the absolute vacuum state. A few people who come from nirvana to the second stage, which is the nirvikalpa samadhi, the I am God state, if they you have to wait for about 21, if you hang out till about 21 days, you have the option of experiencing nirvikalpa samadhi and then vanish off into the formless. Okay. And then if you want to, this is all depending on how the divine theme works for each individual soul. So the option is some souls who have nirvikalpa samadhi immediately go off into the formless, and some souls who have nirvikalpa samadhi and still have the gross body. Then you have 3 or 4 different categories, which is on page number 278, the table. So I won't go into that. But just to answer your question about nirvana and nirvikalpa samadhi, that nirvana is mukti or liberation, where you don't get Satchitananda, infinite knowledge, infinite power, or infinite bliss. You only go into the bliss, divine vacuum state, and that's it.
I got it. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Great. So we'll get back to the supplement. Page number is 239. Fana and Fana Phila. Fana is the state of unconscious consciousness. In Fana Phila, in Phanafila, soul is unconscious of everything except self being God. Before the soul loses its human state and gains the divine state of Nirvikalpa, it has to experience the vacuum state of Nirvana. Nirvana is the infinite vacuum, a state in which the soul is fully conscious of real nothing. And if in the state of Nirvana, the human body is dropped, one passes into a state of the infinite bliss of God. In some cases, Nirvana is immediately and inevitably followed by Nirvikalpa or Panafila, where the soul is fully conscious of real everything. Nirvana and Nirvikalpa are so closely linked that each can be said to be the divine goal. False nothing equal to false everything. Real nothing equal to neither everything nor nothing. Real everything equal to God the infinite. You'll see these equations again. False nothing is equal to the false everything. Real nothing is equal to neither everything, okay, nor nothing, okay. False, real everything is equal to God the infinite. False nothing leads to false everything, and real nothing leads to real everything. False nothing is linked to false everything, and real nothing is linked to real everything. Eventually, false nothing ends in false everything, and real nothing ends in real everything. In duality, false nothing is false everything. In unity, real nothing and real everything are one.
I just want to make a comment here that this three things that he has talked about: false nothing, real nothing, and real everything. Just make a note that basically real everything is the Nirvikalpa Samadhi or Phanafila, and real nothing is the Nirvana, the infinite vacuum.
Correct.
Also understand. See, first thing is not written by Baba. Okay. Uh, Nirvana and Nirvikal, they are not the same. Nirvikal, sorry. Nirvikal and Nirvikal Samadhi, they are not the same. Nirvikal means choiceless. Okay? Both are states. Nirvana is also a state. It's not a location, it's a state. Within yourself.
No, I was also confused by that. You're right, Tushar, because I think this is something that's unclear. Nirvana and Nirvikalpa. Now, does he mean Nirvana and Nirvikalpa Samadhi? Then the whole statement makes sense. But as you said, semantically, Nirvikalpa is different from Nirvikalpa
Real
Samadhi.
nothing definition is not correct. Real nothing definition as neither everything nor nothing is not correct. Real nothing is the real everything in the first Paramatma state, right? It's not both or not none of them.
Okay. He further says, Meher
And
Baba's.
this is someone else writing. This is a view of someone else. Just as me, I can be wrong also in making these comments.
Correct.
Because ultimately Baba rules.
Correct.
So I think these words are very important to understand and to be used. For instance, when I say the Atma is sleeping, what I mean is Atma is dormant. You can't reach there because of your personality, the sheaths, various sheets of sanskaras. So earlier, I wanted to make a point when you asked the first question was that why you don't understand and all this is abstract is also because you are traversing 84 lakh lives. Okay.
Correct.
Do you get me?
Correct.
You're traversing 84 lakh lives through the reading of God's space in just a few hours. So it's not very easy to understand.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
Do you
and
get the point?
maybe there is a real vacuum between my ears. We don't know. That may be the reason too.
No, it'll take time for you to understand.
Yeah, true, true, true.
And to concretize this, it'll take time.
No, at least I want to register what I didn't understand. I'm totally I'm accepting a lot of things I don't understand.
The answer cannot be in a few minutes. No, that's like,
Agreed.
what is the limitation here?
Chalo,
Yeah,
I will continue.
please go ahead.
Meher Baba has also made the following points. The real goal is to realize God in human form, but those who drop their bodies before attaining God realization, that is, those who drop their bodies in the state of nirvana before attaining the state of nirvikalpa, their goal is liberation, mukti, from the cycle of rebirth. They experience infinite bliss only. The individuality of the one who attains nirvikalpa state is retained as infinite and unlimited even after dropping the human body, and there is a continuous experience of I am God. But the one who attains mukti, liberation, experiences I am Anand. That is, I am infinite bliss. And this limits his experience of unlimited individuality, of I am infinite power, knowledge, bliss simultaneously. And this limits his experience of unlimited individuality, of, okay, that this limits his experience of unlimited individuality of I am infinite power, knowledge, and bliss simultaneously. Infinite knowledge is the most important aspect of the triune nature of God. When an individual realizes God in human form, infinite bliss remains the most important aspect of one's experience when one has dropped one's body in the state of nirvana and attains mukti, liberation. Mazub A. Kamil experiences the infinite knowledge, power, bliss simultaneously. And when he comes down to normal consciousness, when he is also duality conscious and is no more in the state of Mazub A Kamil, he not only experiences knowledge, power, bliss, but also uses them while having his human body. Okay. With that, we'll go back to the main book. The first one. This phanafila is the goal where I am God state is experienced. For example, by those persons who are called mazubs, one being overpowered by God or one whom God controls. These persons are also known as Brahmi boots. In this state, one constantly, continually, and consciously experiences the I am God state together with the continued and conscious experience of the infinite triune nature of God, Sat Chit Anand, infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss as one's own infinite nature. So, it is that self conscious God in the man state as man in the seventh plane is now fully conscious of self as infinite and eternal. He is now also conscious of the source of energy and mind, which were nothing but the finite aspects of his own infinite power and infinite knowledge, which he experiences now while being continually in infinite bliss. In his travail to gain self consciousness, the indivisible eternal God, unconscious of his infinite state, gathered and experienced innumerable diverse impressions, and all the while associated himself with finite and ephemeral existences, unfurling the gross, subtle, and mental worlds, while evolving gross consciousness of the gross world and while involving consciousness of the subtle and mental planes of the subtle and mental worlds. The final involution of the consciousness of God culminated in conscious realization of his self in his infinite state. Consequently, when the consciousness of God gained consciousness of self and experienced infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, God realized that he exists eternally in infinite bliss, and that all through the travail of gaining self consciousness, the impressions, experiences, and associations and disassociations of the gross, subtle, and mental bodies and worlds were of the nothing and were but vacant dreams. He realized too that identification with the gross bodies, creatures, and human beings, and all the experiences of the three worlds and the six planes, with all of their paraphernalia, had their relative existences sustained and maintained as long as his consciousness was immature. Maturity was only attained in the seventh plane with the consciousness full. This led God to realize his self or made God fully conscious of God realization. In other words, God's own infinite state was consciously realized by God himself when he attained the I am God state. In other words, God first goes through the becoming process of the gross. That is, in the gross, God becomes the body of Annabhavana, gross sphere. Then in the subtle, he becomes the energy of Pranabhavana, subtle sphere. Then in the mental, he becomes the mind of Manobhavana,
Bhuvana.
mental sphere. Bhuvana, mental sphere. Beyond this, in the Vijnan, God becomes God. What? That which he was and is and always will be. Therefore, God, who was originally unconscious, now becomes oblivious of oblivion itself and gets the real and final answer to his original first word, who am I? As I am God. Thus, in the gross, subtle, and mental spheres, God becomes actually what he really is not. And in Vigyan, he becomes actually what he really is. Originally, God was God. Now, God has become God. Again, I don't see the difference in the last line, but originally God was God. Now,
Yes.
God has become
Before
God.
the whim, he was God himself.
Correct.
After all this travail of illusion, he has realized that he has
And
become
come
God.
back to the same God. Okay,
Yes.
come back to the same God.
So these four paragraphs are almost the summary.
Summary.
Yes.
God has become God. You know the difference between the original God and the subsequent God after becoming? What is the difference?
What is the difference?
There is a difference.
Aha. What is that?
What is that?
I'm asking you.
Huh?
I'm asking you.
Okay. This is the process of, say,
Everything is over. There is God and again he has become God. So what is the difference?
See, the difference is basically that God during the Vim state was unconscious. He was Atma and Paramatma are one. It's only a subset. So
No,
God during the Vim
there is no
split
whim in the
into
first part. First thing, there is no whim. Whim comes later on. In this last line, God was God, now God has become God. What is the difference between the two gods?
no, God
the
was
original.
God is before the
It's a
whim.
one-line answer. It's a one-line answer.
Go
There
ahead.
is whim as yet when God was God, correct?
Yes.
Agree?
Yeah,
We
that is
can
the
take it
beyond
as
God
a
state.
Yeah,
small
now
self.
God has become God. The difference is this second God is with full self-consciousness.
Yes.
There is no
Now,
self-consciousness in the first God. That's the only difference.
can we put it as small as self becoming big as self?
Big S
Self.
self.
Yes.
The Paramatma is also a self. Do you understand? The first God
Yes.
is
Yes.
also a self. It's only after Dvait start comes from small and big self. Otherwise, there is only self. You are God. God is you. The big self.
Yes.
See, all this is within us. It's not outside. So when Buddha said there is no God, he meant something else actually. So I am born in that tradition. I know what he means, that God is not as people perceive in the finite and limited state. We all perceive God as in a temple, let's say. It's finite and limited, right? You're given a roof.
See, we know intellectually and theoretically, based on the scriptures, that we are God, image of God. But experientially, we have to experience and realize this.
Everyone knows that.
Yeah.
Theoretically.
So
This is
this
a
is
base for us to get there.
so, in the back cover of the God Speaks, Baba said, God cannot be explained, he cannot be argued about, he cannot be theorized, nor can he be discussed and understood. God can only be lived. To understand the infinite eternal reality is not the goal of individualized beings in the illusion of creation, because the reality can never be understood. It is to be realized by conscious experience.
Experience.
Therefore, the goal is to realize the reality and attain the I am God state in human form. This is Meher Baba's original quote. So I think that kind of summarizes everything.
What is your experience and what do you quote?
I'm in the process. That's it.
Exactly.
Yes.
See, we all are going to experience. This is becoming a base for us, a starting point for us.
Yes. Yes.
So we are discussing at the academic level here. See, all along, Baba has never said what it is. Okay? He is talking of consciousness all along and experiencing. Experiencing is the word all along he has used. Even in sanskaras, he's saying you don't make choices, you just experience them. That is what is witnessing. That is what is Sakshi Bhav.
Sakshi Bhava.
Yeah, that is witnessing. Witnessing means experiencing.
But there is also another way of looking at it is Mano Nash. Basically, because of our ego, we are not able to experience and realize God 24/7. I think there are moments in our waking state of 16 hours a day where
Exactly.
I feel that when I'm in being, when there is no mind, you are, like you said, the Sakshi Bhav happens to a lot of people, but they are unconscious of it.
Yeah, so the whole idea is to be aware, right? Choiceless awareness is the goal.
Correct.
To attain that. I'm saying that's the tool we have to use. Even meditation
So,
is a tool. The moment
so
you achieve something, you have to drop meditation also. Like that.
the word
Yeah.
God realization is an oxymoron. Basically, the whole process of living in the waking state is to dissolve the thinking mind ego, because the thinking mind ego is the culprit.
Yeah, exactly. Personality. We call this personality. Okay.
The ego personality selves. Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. The
Or the
mind part.
false I self. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we have to transcend that. That's the goal. Now, how we do it, it's not easy. We have to We have
I
tools
think it
to.
is easy. I think it is easy.
Hmm.
It depends on how you look at it, right?
I can join hands to you. If you
Depends
think
I
on
think
it's
it's
easy, I
easy
can
to
join.
theoretically understand, but I think it's very difficult to implement. Yes, but it's not impossible.
Yeah. I mean, what I draw from all my experience so far on
Yeah.
what you need is understanding and choiceless awareness. These are the two main tools right now for us. Okay. And you need not close your eyes in meditation. You can open eyes also.
So you wanted to discuss this at the end of the session, given we are almost out of time.
I think I already
So I'll
explained.
just read that line again.
No, you have to read the whole page. But what I was trying to point is all along he has used the word experiencing. He's not used the word choosing. So when we were talking yesterday, Kama had asked a question. I was thinking of it later on after the session that what Kama asked to distinguish between desire and will. It's a tough one. He's right. It's not very easy to distinguish. Now, I'll put it to make you understand and make, as I have understood, is the part is if you make two divisions of matter and spirit, the will part is towards the spirit, and the desire part is towards the matter. So, if you have a six-pointed star, okay,
Mm.
a six-pointed star with one apex pointing upwards and one apex pointing downwards. There are two triangles overlapping, right? Does everyone get this? Or
Yeah.
we trying to get two triangles overlapped in a six-pointed star? Are you getting it, Rama? Are you getting this?
You're talking about two
Two triangles.
triangles where one is inverted.
One is inverted and it becomes a six-pointed star, correct?
Right, right.
So that triangle which is pointing down is matter. And the triangle which is pointing upwards with the apex upward is
Mm.
spirituality. And human being, and they are totally. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
yes.
Uh, they are overlapping and they are tangled. I mean, they are not separate. They're tangled.
Okay.
Matter
Right.
is tangled, and we are in center point of that star. And what
Okay.
we have to choose. This is a choice. Yeah, you can draw that.
So what are you saying? What's on top?
See this. Uh, the apex here, the highest point,
Yeah.
is a triangle of spirituality.
Okay.
And the most bottom thing is
Yeah.
this part. That's a triangle pointing down, which is matter.
Okay.
So here is where you need to put your vivek, discrimination. Whatever you do should not be matter within matter. The distinction has to be spiritual versus matter. Even Maharishi Raman's path of nature, all of you know this. I am not that.
Hmm.
I am God and I am not that is the same thing. Because I am not to achieve I am God, you have to first say I am not that.
Hmm.
Has anyone practiced this as a meditation? Have you practiced this?
No.
Maharishi
You're
Raman,
talking about the nothing and everything, and also the triangle analogy you're giving is like the Maslow's self-actualization principle, which is a pyramid. So
Yeah.
basically, all human beings have to start with roti kapda makan,
two dimensions.
and
I'm not.
then you go on. To me, that self-actualization principle of the Maslow's thing is very
Very,
obvious
very,
and very
very,
easy
very
to
obvious.
understand. Yes.
Yeah. In fact, I was thinking about bringing that up 2, 3 times. As a student in management school, the most exciting thing to me was that, because I found it to be so useful in life. and I didn't realize why I was excited. Now I know because
No, it's a simplified form of God speaks. I'm telling you.
absolutely,
It's
absolutely.
very easy
So
to understand.
I'll explain
Yes.
that for anybody. You want to explain it? Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead. Go
No,
ahead.
no.
You're the guy.
It basically is
Hey, I have not finished, so
yeah, we
please
finished. Yeah.
continue. Please
Yeah.
continue. I
No,
don't
no,
think
you finish your thing, then we'll
Finish,
spend
finish.
5 minutes on masters.
we can't do that. Please go ahead.
No, no, no. You finish the thing. This is unrelated, but I'm excited. He also saw the parallel, so I jumped to that. So you finish off your flow of thought.
I have forgotten, yes. I have a problem in forgetting things. That is why I tell you to mark. I
Yeah,
have a problem. No, you know my problem.
yeah.
No, you were talking about the two triangles. The top part of the triangle, which is the spirit part, and the
I
inverted
think,
triangle, the bottom
I think
apex
you
is the.
are missing my point, so there's no point in telling you this. Maybe some other time when we have a full session, I'll do this.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's keep it for a future.
Okay, Karthi, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. So basically, Abraham Maslow talks about the hierarchy of needs. Okay. So he says man in his life has a hierarchy of needs. The bottom needs are of basically roti, kapda, and makan. Let's put it that way. He uses obviously other English terms. Roti, kapda, and makan is the bottom. Then you go to the next stage, which is I think affiliation, right? I need to be affiliated to groups. I need to have a identity which I can claim. I have a degree, whatever. Then I go to what is it? I've forgotten. Let's grab it from online so that I don't mess it up.
All I can say is this is different. What you're saying is very different from what I was going to say.
Okay. Okay.
Breathing.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
So my Windows machine had a blue screen of death. So
Oh,
it's still in process of dying. So maybe you're getting some noise from that. So I will share this screen now. Which screen is this? So here it is. You start with physiological, then you go for safety, that I need a home over my head. Then you
Please
need
change it.
not
Please
not
show
visible.
the screen. Yeah.
you're not able to see it.
Yeah.
No, we are
Not
seeing
yet.
ourselves.
Okay, hold on.
Student should this particular pyramid because it summarizes a human being's different stages in life.
Okay.
Uh,
Tell me when you see a pyramid.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, Kama, why don't you explain?
Um, the way I can, let me tell you my version of it. It's very simple.
Sure.
Basically, every human being needs the basic needs. See, there are two things. There is needs and there is wants. So needs are basically air to breathe, water to drink, and food to eat. So the food, shelter, clothing, roti, kapda, makan is a basic necessity for all human beings when they are alive. After that, what? Today we live in a technology world, so we all need to have a good personal life and we need to have a good professional life. So most people today, we are talking about the middle class and upper middle class. We have an education, we have a professional life, and we become householders. We have a personal life. So what happens is once we have a good balancing act, and what happens is we fulfill our material goals both in our personal life and professional life. Then what happens is there is a uh, on the pyramid, the second last stage on the top is called self-esteem. So self-esteem is what most people are struggling today, especially the younger and older generation now who have reached all their material goals in life. Let's say, for example, Sunil and Romita, both of you are married, you have children, both the children are well settled. Probably both of you are working or like retired or have a fulfilling material life. You have reached all your material goals. But there is always this question, what is next? I fulfilled all this, but something is missing. And this is the basically the whim, the who am I state. So today, a lot of people are struggling at the stage of low self-esteem. And the clear example, live case study is the Rajat Gupta syndrome, which you all know. I won't go into the details. Now, this is a man who had $130 million and he was in the multi-millionaire club. And he looked at Rajaratnam, who had $1.3 billion and who was in the billionaire. So Rajat Gupta, the situation was that he had what they called as billionaire's envy. He wanted to jump from the multimillionaire to become a billionaire. So this is a guy who was head of the best consulting firm. All the CEOs knew him. All the country heads knew him. But according to my understanding, I've never read it anywhere. This is just my own insight that Rajat Gupta suffered from low self-esteem, which made him, which kind of influenced him to do what he did. So the last stage is self-actualization. So in today's world, when you go out and talk about God realization, self-realization, people will say buzz off. But I think if you can use Maslow's hierarchy, then people will kind of relate to it. So the word self-actualization in my book is equivalent to God realization, self-knowledge,
Self-realization.
self-realization, so on and so forth. So this is a quick synopsis of what I have understood.
And to be fair, he also says self-realization to the apex of the pyramid, right? Only additional point which is very important in his hierarchy of needs is he says that the lower needs don't excite you after you go to the next level. So once your physiological needs are met, you are no longer motivated by that. So like Kama just said, when you get to the love belonging stage and go to esteem, love belonging no longer excites you. You're exhausted those impressions in a sense,
Questions, yeah.
right? And then you go to esteem, and then that also is not giving you what you want. So
Oh,
it's a hierarchy of needs which you let go the lower needs as you move higher, and the last one is
yes.
the self realization.
So basically, as you have to first let go of your gross impressions, which then becomes finer impressions in the subtle
Exactly.
body,
Yeah.
and then you go into the mental aspect.
Yeah.
So that is involution stage. First, we are all still stuck in the gross impressions with our lust, greed, and anger for all the five senses, physical senses.
Hmm.
So unless we get let go or renunciate the five physical senses, touch, taste, sound, smell, sight, then only we can start going into the threshold of the first plane and the second plane of involution. Another
Correct.
point I want to make is this is my observation. If you look at our human civilization, only in the last 100 years, due to industrial revolution, most of us were in a village, basically in agricultural economy. We all lived in joint families. And whether it was a village, town, or city, the center of focus was the spiritual place, masjid, church, or temple. And all our life revolved on spirituality, and around it, we built our material life. And today, what has happened is it has become ulta. Today, our focus is the material life, and then we focus on the spiritual life. And that is why we are seeing so much suffering now than what we would have seen earlier.
So that brings me to an interesting point. Maybe Maslow's thinking and structure is for the Western world, which now we are aping, but our model was far superior.
Uh,
Our our
can I,
social construct was far more superior. Go ahead, Mama.
uh, as I see this triangle of Maslow,
Mhm.
so you have to go up from the bottom till the top.
Correct.
So you have to achieve each level and then you reach the other level.
Correct.
But in our study till now, we say these are all false. So
Yeah, yeah,
start
yeah. No,
thinking
no.
of the top itself first,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
then go ahead and don't give importance to this. Maslow said, once you have say safety, you have,
Mm-hmm.
then you think of love.
Correct.
But here, that is not the criteria. I think we have to drop everything and then think of only the top peak.
Correct. Correct. No,
So
I'll
that
tell
is
you. I'll tell you the context here, right? Maslow
okay.
wrote it as a way of understanding human behavior
Okay.
to to specifically target motivation.
Ah,
As a HR guy,
yes, yes,
I have to first make sure my labor gets roti, kapda, makan.
yes,
Once
yes,
that is reached, giving them more roti does not going to will not make them work better. I'll have to give them safety.
yes,
After I give them safety, I have to give them the caring and loving and belonging, Tata Steel.
okay,
Then I
okay.
have to give them esteem. So I'll have to judge. This is the motivational theory in management. So he's coming at it from that side. But then I saw the parallel in this in the fact that you let go of levels and then go towards the final
Ah,
goal of self realization. Right.
but you
Anyway,
have to be cautious that we have to think of the top and then try to ignore or
ignore
say
the
give least importance to the levels, bottom
below.
level.
True. True.
Yes. Okay.
See,
Tushar, did it come back? Your triangles?
No, I don't want to come back because
Okay.
you all have missed the point. This triangle and whatever you explained is just gross body and the gross consciousness.
Absolutely. This is not
Transcendent.
nothing to do with spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely nothing. I don't know why you brought this point here. I am
no,
not
I
very happy.
Two
see.
Gombas, two MBS problem.
No, I
No,
don't
no, no,
think
no,
that,
no.
I don't
I'm being
think
very.
the whole thing is relevant at all with what
It is very
we
much
can
relevant
all
because
laugh
it
in
talks
lighter
about the
ways.
material
I
life.
don't mind. I don't mind, but this is out of totally.
S- Look, Karthik, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
When I was in IIT, like when I was doing my engineering, I said like I have to self-realize. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, I didn't know what the self-realization is, but I knew that this is the goal of a human being. So I went into it, and I did not study and kind of just wild of my time. And when I look back, what I'm thinking is basically I put the cart before the horse. What I mean is that instead of focusing on the material life, on my duties and responsibilities of being a good student, I kind of jumped from from the brahmachari stage to the sannyas stage rather than going through the grahasti and vanaprastha. It's just a crude example. What I'm trying to say is first people have to be practical. And in today's 21st century, when everybody is living on their own, you have to first take care of their roti kapda makan. You have to take care of your daily material life, practical life. Then, spirituality comes. Like Karl Marx said, religion is the opium of the masses. If if you are not, first you have to fulfill the needs of the body, you know. So I think that when we come to the wants, that's where the ego comes and all the desires and all those other aspects comes in, of our, spiritual advancement. But I'll just want to point out one thing. If you guys have the time, you should read the chapter called Dynamics of Spiritual Advancement on page 252. And it is a beautiful chapter which will summarize what we are talking about now. So, yeah, I'll stay with that.
Great. I know we have run a lot out of time, but it's our weekend
Interesting
schedule.
still. Yeah.
Okay.
So have a good weekend. I think I have lost track of what is a weekend and weekday because all days are the same.
Same, yeah, same here.
Which is a good thing.
But
Every day is Sunday.
Still, I have the reservations about the single triangle.
Okay. No, absolutely.
Okay.
Justifiable.
Okay. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Okay,
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.